Hello and welcome to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation's webinar, Advocating for Learning, Educational Rights, and School Support for Children with Brain Tumors. My name is Alex Henderson, and I'm the Bilingual Family Support Manager for the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for this important subject. Before we get started, I have a few guidelines to review. You're muted for this webinar and your video is disabled, but we welcome questions during and after the opening remarks. So please type your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window. We might not get to every question, but we'll try to answer as many as possible. And we're pleased to welcome Alma Morgan for today's webinar. As an educational consultant with over 40 years in education, Alma loves working with children, teens, and young adults. She believes that all children can be successful in the educational setting with the proper tools. Much of Alma's career has been devoted to the educational support of children with chronic health needs at the Children's Hospital of Richmond VCU Medical Center. In 1990, Alma joined the board of directors of Ask Childhood Cancer Foundation. After serving on the board, she joined the Ask staff. Throughout her advocacy work with the Virginia General Assembly, Alma played a key role in securing funding for educational support of childhood cancer patients, survivors, and their families. And starting in 2022, Alma helped create, launch, and manage the Ask Education Navigator Support Program at the 5 primary pediatric cancer treatment centers in Virginia, ensuring all children in Virginia diagnosed with cancer receive equitable educational support for the first time. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Alma Morgan.
Welcome. Thanks for coming today and joining us. Alex, thank you, and the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation for inviting me to speak. This is a topic that's very dear to my heart. In working close to 40 years with this population, I know the great need. So for all my parents and caregivers that's on this call today, I hope I'll answer all your questions, and don't hesitate to ask if I don't. I want to start today with some quotes. This first quote is from one of my teens who had a brain tumor about 3 years ago and has gone through treatment. And when I called and said, give me a quote, this is what she said: be patient and don't be too hard on yourself, and eventually you will see the light. I know in working with parents over the years, particularly at the beginning of diagnosis, lots of tears, and they're wondering, will we ever find some normalcy again? And I always say yes, and they look at me like they don't believe me, and then they come back a year or so later and they say, Alma, thank you for giving us that hope, and we are seeing it. I have another quote I want to share with you, and it's from the parent of this child, teen. Advocate for the needs that you as a parent know your child needs, even when faced with a big challenge. Give your child the autonomy they deserve. Never give up because your child never gives up. Never stop laughing. Find hope and experience gratitude. They are everywhere. Sometimes you have to look, accept grace, and help from the experts around you. It makes this journey so much lighter. And when the fight gets difficult, channel your child's courage, because they are likely the most courageous person you'll ever know. And I definitely believe that. They are brave and courageous. And I often say, young people will tell me, that they're worried about their parents. And then the parents say, I'm worried. And you're both protecting each other, but you're learning and you're growing from each other. And you're both very great, brave and courageous. I have these education support navigators across the state, and this is the navigator that was working with this young teen. But he just wanted to make it this general for all the population. Working with a child or teen who has been diagnosed with a brain tumor can be incredibly challenging given the complexity of their condition. Every aspect of school can be affected, from academics to emotional health to socialization. Although it can be heartbreaking at times to watch young people work so hard to try and regain their ability to walk, speak, write, and learn, it's also truly inspirational. And I guess I'll have to say it is so inspirational. That's why people laugh and say, Elma, you've been doing this a long time, close to 40 years. When are you going to retire? And I sometimes say probably never because um, it's just a passion. You fall in love with your patients, you fall in love with your families, you know there's a need, and you want to educate everybody about childhood cancer and what these children have been through to make their life as easy as possible as they are regaining normalcy. I'm going to skip the next slide for a moment, and I want you, this is the young lady that we were discussing. This is Isabella. And, you know, on this, she has a beautiful smile. One thing that I had asked her educational tutor, and as I read your questions, I thought, oh, I have to put this in. Tammy Long was the educational tutor and social coordinator up in our Fredericksburg area. And this is what the quote she sent me. And I know I hate reading to everybody, but I know you can read, but sometimes I find that words are powerful. It has been a privilege to be part of Isabella's education journey as she navigates life in school after her brain tumor. She has posted this quote by Carl Jung on her social media accounts. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become. And I have been inspired by her grit and resolve to live it out. And that is definitely Isabella. In the initial stages of our work together, while Isabella was still in active treatment, focus on school was difficult, but she was determined. She was regaining strength and muscle control, relearning skills like swallowing, grasping objects with her hands, getting up, and standing unassisted. At that time, communication, motor coordination, and sustained focus were the biggest challenges during our school sessions. It was difficult to assess understanding of lesson material due to limited communications. Speech was still difficult to understand, and fine motor skills were developing. So, typing and writing were also difficult. In those early days, we made progress by taking lessons in small chunks and providing all questions in multiple choice format. I was her scribe for video lectures, and I reframed questions and materials while redirecting her to our detailed notes for answer retrieval. After 21 months learning together, our conversations are easy, and she is much more interactive with the video and online lessons. Isabella's curriculum is provided solely through an online platform with video lectures and digital assignments. So during each video lecture, I still take notes, ask questions during the lecture to monitor understanding and attention, and provide notes access during assessments. In science and English, reduced writing requirements have made the course goals more achievable. Isabella asks questions as it relates to things she's previously learned and remains curious about, but offering weight has been essential in giving time to process and retrieve lesson information. Visual representation of material in the form of pictures, graphic organization, verbal key access have been an integral part in successful assignment. So, you know, from Isabella's quote to the mother talking make learning so much easier. They do. We'll see. Well, by attending school, participating in extracurricular activities, and interacting socially with peers. When I first started at Children's Hospital of Richmond in the early 1990s, working up on the pediatric floor with this population, I realized that at that time, most of these children were given homebound instruction throughout their school career. Some of them, it was years and years later. It could have been, after treatment, after all the PT, OT, speech, homebound instruction. Did they return to school? By that time, they had lost focus. Um, they really had lost contact with their patient, with their friends. They wanted to participate in extracurricular activities. However, some of the extracurricular activities, like sports that they were doing before, they could no longer participate in. So, we return to work as adults, after we are out for any kind of lengthy illness, and we can't wait to get back to work. Well, these children, they need to get back to school. So it was probably later in the 90s, we started doing a lot of work. As soon as their counts were high enough, we went in and we started working with the schools, really trying to put in all the accommodations they would need to make their day as normal as possible. Sometimes they might only attend partial day, sometimes full day, but we knew we had to get them back to school, because if we waited till 4 or 5 years later, it was going to be too late. It was going to be too difficult for them to return. So, what are the challenges that these children with brain tumors face? We know there are many. There are many. I'm going to show you this, and I know all of you have seen this before. Depending on where the tumor is located, is the difficult problems that they might have. And I think this picture, I would advise all of you to have a copy of this. And when you're working with your schools and you're working with the teachers, let them know, show them this and let them know where the tumor has affected your child. The physical challenges that I want to address, you know these as well as I do: the fatigue, muscle weakness and low stamina, neuropathy, in the hands and feet, nausea and vomiting. I know some of my children with brain tumors that I have, sent back to school, they say mornings are really difficult. Sometimes I'm throwing up in the mornings. Sometimes I throw up in the trash can in the classroom. The pain, mood swings if they're on any kind of steroids, the altered physical appearance, gross and fine motor deficits that we know about, the hearing and visual loss, seizures, dizziness, paralysis, headaches. All of these are just the challenges that, our children face, and that we have to educate the teachers and those working with our children about, as well as the classmates. What are the cognitive challenges? As I was reading some of the questions that came across, the difficulty with memory loss, the slower processing skills, I will tell you they are the two that I see the most, particularly the slower processing skills. And I know sometimes when they're doing assessments, the parent will call and say, they told me that when they, for my second grader, when they were assessing them on their sight words and all, that they did not know them. They didn't know any of them, but they do. They know them all. Well, what happens is that they show them the flashcard or they show them the word, and then before the child can process the information that they really do know the word, before they can retrieve it and say it, they've moved to the next word. And sometimes they can go through the entire stack of words before anybody, and they'll say they don't know them. Well, they do know them. And I tell teachers sometimes you might have to wait 5 minutes or more, but they do know this information. And I tell the parent and the child, I'm not concerned with how quickly you can respond. I just want you to know the information. So if you take all the time you need. Poor organization, difficulty multitasking, and ability to focus and concentrate. We all know they are executive functioning skills, and they're the things that we're gonna teach them skills on how to compensate for some of these things. I know this past year through through Virginia, we offered an executive functioning skills workshop. It was virtual, once a week for 10 weeks for our teens. and we had young people across the state. The one thing that came from it, I think they all realize there are challenges in regards to executive functioning. They say before my diagnosis, um, I was a straight A student and I could get things done. Now it takes me a lot longer. I have difficulty concentrating for long periods of time. I might have to go back and read the same passage several times. So learning is so difficult for me. And what we have to do, but the one good thing about the workshop was that they said, this makes me feel so much better because I know it's not only me. I know it's other people that are having the same difficulty. And that kind of makes me feel better. So the bonding episode there. Social emotional challenges, lack of exposure to, the play groups when they were younger, if they were diagnosed. They could have been the star of a quarterback on the football team, and now they no longer can play football. I mean, it's so much the loss of the contact with the friends and peers, maturity level where they can relate really well. They've spent so much time in the hospital and the clinic with adults, nurses, doctors, and likewise. But sometimes it's hard to relate to their peers, plus what they've been through. Some of the teenagers tell me, Alma, it's really hard to be worried about, that I have a pimple on my cheek after all I've been through. And people get so upset about that, so just their level, their maturity level is somewhat higher. Their desire for independence, need for acceptance, and finding a social group in which to belong. And we have to help our young people find that group. Sometimes they go back to school and they say, oh, they'll call me and they'll say, I had a good day, but I didn't have anybody to sit with at lunchtime, or I didn't have anybody to talk to at recess. So we have to help them engage, help them ask, may I sit at your lunch table? Do they have a peer buddy at recess? Feelings of being different. And this is something I've learned a lot over the years. When I first started, I'd go, oh, you're not different. And then I had to learn, yes, you are different. And I have to respect how you feel. You feel different. Of course you do, because you are different. Everybody's different. And what you've been through is really different than what a lot of people have been through. And then feelings of sadness, guilt, anger, worry, loss, and grief. They meet a lot of friends in clinic. They lose some of their friends. It's the loss, it's the grief, the bereavement. Some of our children, I work a lot with some young adults now. They are close to in their late 40s and early 50s. And the survivorship guilt that, they say, I know I was left here for a reason. And I feel like I have so much to prove and I have to give back. And so, I'm still sad, about, that I did miss my childhood, or I'm angry about, losing some of my friends. So, I mean, lots of worries when scans are coming up and different things. So it's so many emotions and so many feelings coming across at the same time. And then the spiritual challenges. And I always say that we do have to, take this. Sometimes I read children's essays, their college essays, because we give scholarships through ASK to some of our children. And when they answer the essay questions, some years they're all addressing, God or higher beings or this spiritual challenge, like, why did this happen to me? Why do bad things happen to good people? But then they always go back and they say, this whole experience has been somewhat bittersweet. You wouldn't believe the young people that have told me over the years, I hated having to go through treatment. I hated having to learn to walk and, speak and do everything over. But at the same time, I'm glad it happened because I feel so much stronger now and I feel empowered. And I made so many good friends, and I really know what matters in life and what's important. When we're working with teachers and school personnel and people with our children, visible versus invisible scars. And I think we always have to educate other people on this too. The visible scars can be where I had my portacath, or the scar where they did the surgery on the head, or it could be, just bruising, and still maybe being, pale but at the same time, the invisible scars. Parents sometimes call me and they're so upset. They went back to school and the teacher said, "Oh, they're back to normal. They have their hair back and everything's fine. Your child's back to normal." And I'll go, "No, my child will not be back to normal. Their learning is so different now." So we have to educate on visible versus invisible scars. Late effects of childhood cancer survivors. 2 of every 3 survivors have at least one late effect. And I went through all these late effects, and some of them aren't even on the pages. 1 of every 3 survivors has 2 or more late effects. And 1 of every 3 survivors has a serious late effect that will affect quality of life and may affect mortality. So, how can school nurses and educators help? Well, we have to educate them. And as parents, I want you to. You have to help them gain an understanding of the illness and how it impacts the student. Educate other school personnel who's working with the child. It can be the cafeteria worker who might need to understand, if they have difficulty saying what they want on their tray or carrying their tray back to their table. Explore school health plans and educational plans. We have to keep that school nurse involved, and she should always be at any of the meetings you have with school personnel. Investigate how neuropsychological testing and career assessments can assist in educational planning. And that's very, very important. I think sometimes we're sending children back to school and we don't know for sure, are they still working on grade level? If not, how far behind are they? What are, what are their weaknesses? And that is when you get the neuropsychological testing, it looks at verbal comprehension, visual spatial, processing speed, memory, short term memory, the broad reasoning. So, all of this is taken into consideration with the psychological testing. Also, they do educational testing, which could be where they're looking at achievement scores in the reading, the writing, and the math. A lot of times the Woodcock-Johnson psychoeducational battery is given for that, or the WIAT. Career assessments for our high school students and for those who are young adults who have gone through treatment and they no longer, we have to give them a career assessment because we're asking, what do you want to do after you graduate? I don't know. I don't know what I can do. Well, we need to help them find their strengths. So we're looking at their, competencies. What are you really good at? What are your challenges? What are your values? What are your interests? I hate sometimes when I hear that I'm working with teens and they said, "Alma, they planned my schedule and they put me in an art class. I'm not interested in art." Or they put me in theater. I definitely don't want to be in theater. So we have to really look at what are their interests and help them find a career path. And if they're interested in using computers, then they might want to take graphic arts in school. So they might want to go to the vocational school that's affiliated with their school division. So all that has to be explored. Assist with transition periods from kindergarten to, that's a big year. First year back at school, and then on to middle school and to high school, and then on to college. We tell our young people when they're diagnosed in our clinic and over in Survivor, we've made friends for life because we're going to follow you throughout throughout your treatment and then through these critical transition periods and even to the world of work. And it's been really fun over the years watching these young people, you know, start new jobs, get married, have children. So it's all been um, just helping them get to that next step. steps that they never really thought were possible. And then we have to help our children and team develop advocacy skills. And we always have to be an active supporter to the child while in school. So how can parents help? What you might say, what can I do? And that was a question I had. What am I going to do if they're going back to school in September? So I'm going to lead you through this process. First of all, you want to request a school-based team meeting. And at that school-based team meeting, you're going to educate staff on the diagnosis, on the treatment, on the side effects of treatment, and how the illness impacts the child at home and at school. And you're going to request a child study team meeting that goes to the next step of what evaluations and things that might be needed. But one thing I want to say here, how that illness impacts the child at home and at school. I'm going to be talking about IEPs. I'm going to be talking about 504 plans. Sometimes you were told your child does not qualify for a 504 plan. They're making A's and B's. You know what? Don't accept that, because yes, they're making A's and B's. They're nice children. They're nice teenagers. They come to school. They're doing the best. They're determined. They're doing the best they can. They're holding it together. And they come home and they're so tired and they're so frustrated that they go right to sleep. And then they don't have time to finish their homework. Or they might come home and they're crying because they're so tired and it's been so frustrating to hold it together at school all day. So we have to educate the school on that too. And because of that, I'm going to guide you again through the process of how never to take no for an answer in regards to a 504 meeting plan. At the child study team meeting, parents will share information pertaining to the medical condition. So you will get that dictation from your last clinic visit or doctor's visit. So get the dictation, have a record of the dictation that take to the meeting, discuss how the medical diagnosis may impact learning. I'm going to give you the tools for that today. Determine what strategies and interventions may be needed based on the medical condition. Determine what evaluations may be needed. Consider whether the child may need a neuropsych evaluation through the medical facility. If so, you'll talk to your doctor or the psychologist or social worker on your medical team. If age appropriate, explore whether or not a career assessment may assist with planning. So these are homework things that parents will be doing. Who should serve on the child study team? Everybody working with this child. Everybody. Anybody who works with a child in the school setting and has concerns about his or her academic progress, they need to be there. It can be coaches. It can be club coordinators. It could be teachers. It could be the study hall teacher. The school nurse absolutely needs to be involved because they know more about the medical condition than anybody else at the school besides the child and the parent. So we have to pull everybody together. Why do we need the school nurse there? And again, I'm going to say it. Provide insight as to how the medical condition impacts his or her educational needs. I'm going to tell a story. I talk to school nurses all the time. I recently did a conference for the school nurses here in Virginia. I was standing in front of about 150 people, nurses, and I said, raise your hand if you're always invited to the meeting for a child with a chronic illness in your school. And about 3 hands went up. And I thought, did I word that correctly? And I said, raise your hand if you're never invited. And all the hands went up. And I said, that is really sad. You guys know more about this condition, than diagnosis, than anybody else probably in the school besides the child. and the parent of the child. So you need to be at that meeting and you need to be working because you'll be able to know what they need in the school setting. One nurse raised her hand and she said, yeah, we're told that they can't get coverage. Well, they have to have the meeting when you are available and when the parent's available. So if the parent is requesting you, and parents, I'm saying always request, let the administrator of the child study team know, I want the nurse there. Why is the school plan so crucial? It describes the chronic illness, lists medications given at school and accommodations that are needed for the medical condition and any medical procedures that need to be done at school. So let's talk now about 504 plans. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, it's a civil rights statute that prohibits discrimination based upon disability. So what is a disability? And I love this because sometimes they'll say, well, your child doesn't really qualify. Well, who qualifies based on a disability? What's a disability? A person who has a mental or physical impairment. So there you have it, physical impairment, which substantially limits one or more major life activities. All right, so they have a physical impairment, they've had a brain tumor, they've gone through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I mean, the list goes on and on. They have a record of such an impairment because you have your clinic dictation. And because of the clinic, and they're talking about the medical diagnosis, that's the impairment. So what is an impairment? Okay, it's any disability, long-term illness, or disorder that substantially reduces or lessens a student's ability to access learning in the educational setting because of a learning problem, behavioral issue, or health-related condition. So parents, here you have it. It's a long-term illness. That's an impairment. It's based on a health-related condition. So it fits the definition. Any child with a brain tumor, this fits the definition. What are the major life activities? This will vary depending on the child, but I can tell you concentrating always is one that comes up. And then when we talk about concentrating, then thinking or learning in the environment, if I think of my children with brain tumors, I think walking, seeing, hearing, completing manual tasks, speaking, sitting for long periods, concentrating. The list goes on and on. So let me go back. I'm going back here. So 504 plan, the difference between a 504 plan and a IEP is with an IEP, you need some direct instruction for the academic skills. For major life activities like concentrating and just being in the school environment and getting from class to class, this is perfect for children with chronic health conditions or children who just academically they're fine, they're able to learn, that hasn't been affected, but they do have some of the physical, like the fatigue, getting to class, their gait might be off. Being able to sit for long periods, for concentrate for long periods, they're the 504 accommodations. So what is IDEA? We think about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was formerly known as Public Law 94-142. It was reauthorized in 1997 and again in 2004. It's a federal law that provides funding for special education, a free and appropriate education to all students who fall within the special education category. So you have to be qualified for the special education category to have an IEP. Now, in 2004, it was reauthorized, and I liked when they did this because they went the extra mile. It's to ensure that all children with disabilities have a free public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and to prepare them for further education beyond high school, employment, independent living, and then to ensure that the rights of children with disabilities and parents of such children are protected. So I like that it went on not only while they're in school, but beyond, they started thinking about what are they going to do, as a career? What are they going to do? Do they have the independent living skills to be on their own? So it went the extra mile. So who qualifies for special education services under IDEA? Any child 2 to 21 years of age, inclusive, who has a disabling condition which limits his or her progress in the regular classroom, and any child who needs special education or related services to make progress or appropriate strides in education. And when we're talking about related services, we're talking about speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all that they can get in the school setting. Here are our disabling conditions. And it's two that I'm going to really talk about here. Many of our children are found eligible for special education under the category of other health impairment, OHI, which means limited strength, vitality, or alertness that affects a child's education performance. And due to their health condition, that might affect their educational performance. Another one that we're using now quite a bit for our children with brain tumors is TBI, traumatic brain injury, an acquired injury to the brain caused by an external physical force or by other medical conditions. And of those other medical conditions, there it is, brain tumors and neurological insults resulting from medical or surgical treatment. So the child study team will determine what evaluations are needed in order to find them eligible for services. We always have the medical dictation from the hospital that gives a summary of their medical condition and everything, the treatment that they received. It could be the chemotherapy, the radiation, how long, when did they finish treatment. A psychological is done by the school psychologist, and it talks about, they do a neuropsych testing, talks about behavioral issues. It also discusses, usually gives the WISC, Wechsler's Intelligence Scale for Children. And that looks like, as I said before, at the verbal comprehension, the working memory, the processing speed, the visual spatial. It looks at all those things and comes up with a general an IQ for the child. Educational, that's usually done by the educational diagnostician at the school. And that's when they give the Woodcock-Johnson psychoeducational battery, or they'll give other subtests looking at what are their reading, writing, math scores. Are they on grade level? Are they with their peers? Social history is done by the school social worker. Then you can have speech language, the speech teacher, language impaired teacher come in and do an evaluation for your child. The occupational therapist, we can get an occupational therapy evaluation, a physical therapy evaluation, and one that is often left off and that schools sometimes do not tell you is available. You can ask for assistive technology evaluation. So is there assistive technology that could be used in the classroom that would make it easier for your child in regards to hearing, in regards to writing and fine motor skills? So that evaluation, I said, for the brain tumor children always needs to be completed. Here's a few of the accommodations that I want to talk about. I'm going to show you where you can get our extensive Childhood Cancer Education Toolkit, and it has a page of accommodations in there. I might add a few more on here today, but I just picked out a few. For our children with brain tumor, make sure they have a desk suitable for their body frame and size. Given permission to carry a water bottle and drink throughout the school day. Bathroom passes, guidance passes, and clinic passes when needed. Leave class 5 minutes early to get to their next class to avoid the crowded hallways. If the child is in a wheelchair, absolutely, that they would have somebody be able to assist them to get from one class to another. Exempt from all physical education activities requiring strenuous exercise, long distance running, and direct physical contact. Also, maybe that they'll be exempt from the presidential physical fitness testing, since that's been reinstated in some of our locations. Oral and written directions with clarification of understanding. Student will be assigned a moderate workload with limited assignments requiring quality versus quantity. I love this for our students with brain tumor or any of our students who have the slower processing, because sometimes it's too much to be in school all day and then come home and have a lot of homework. So if you can show that you can master the math assignment by doing 5 math problems as opposed to 10, let that be acceptable. If you can write an essay with 750 words as opposed to 1,000 words, let that be acceptable. If they're having spelling and vocabulary tests, can it be 10 words as opposed to 20 words? Hard copy of notes and PowerPoints. For those with visual problems, it could be magnified if needed. Granted extended time to complete classwork, quizzes, homework, and tests. Weekly communication between parents and the case manager to discuss progress and any missed assignments. Sometimes parents say, I'm at the end of the grading period and I'm finding out, at the end of 9 weeks that they're missing 10 assignments in science and 5 assignments in social studies, and I didn't know it. Well, if you have this weekly communication between the parents and the case manager can see what assignments are missing. And I always say, if you do that weekly, send all those missed assignments home on Friday and ask that they come back on Monday. And that way they're not going to have 10 or 15 assignments missing. They might have 1 or 2. Granted a shortened school day or a rest period if needed. For some of our children, we've had couches in the classroom if they needed to take a nap during the day, but they just still wanted to be there with their friends. Sometimes we put a bean bag in there that's just for the child, and they have their own blanket and pillow in a little bag, and they know that they need to rest. They can curl up in the bean bag. A lot of times I say keep them out of the clinic because that's where all of our germs are during flu season or cold season, but otherwise let them stay in the classroom and we can educate the classmates too. Special transportation when needed. Assigned a peer buddy to take notes or scribe or just to keep them informed of class activities and the school functions. Intermittent homebound. Let's say your child can go to school every day, but you're finding they're missing 1 day a week because they have a clinic appointment. Well, then you might need an intermittent homebound teacher to come in just that 1 day to to help them stay caught up. Extended school year if needed during winter break, spring break, and summer if needed. This is our Childhood Cancer Education Toolkit. You can scan that. It is online. If you ever want a hard copy, feel free to contact me and I will mail you one. These education toolkits, when I designed them, I did one for parents and caregivers that outline this whole process and this whole presentation that I'm doing today to tell you how to go through this child study team process. And then I did not want to talk down to educators who already know the process, but I really talked to them too, same as in the parent book, about the physical, the cognitive, the social, emotional challenges, why accommodations are needed, and how they can be helpful to the parent and to the child. My personal opinion is that all children and teens with a brain tumor should have either a 504 plan or an IEP. I listed too many challenges that these children face, and they don't have to face this alone. We want our children to be successful. That's why these plans are, that's why we have them, to give direct instruction. If a child is not on grade level and needs an IEP, for a 504 plan, if they're just having problems and need to get to their class, avoid the crowded hallways, need extra bathroom privileges, need a place to lie down for a few minutes or to rest, break passes, then we need a 504 plan. Another helpful tool is classroom in-services. I find that children, our patients come back and they say, Alma, it's so annoying. They ask me the same thing every day. Why do you get to wear a hat and I don't? Why don't you have hair? Why don't you have to run the track? How come you miss so much school? Why do you get extra snacks? Why do you get to lie down or put your head down and rest? So we need to educate our classroom, our students, because it answers curious questions. It makes all the children feel less afraid and more comfortable. And it shares ideas on how to be helpful and a good friend. I take my little puppets in. I have puppets with porta cats, and their hair comes off. And I take the puppet in, and I usually take a book to read about whatever the child's been through, the diagnosis. And I talk about, how everybody's different. And I break it down even on their grade level. I had one mom come to me, and her child had a brain tumor, and he was going back to preschool, and he was 3. And she said, I need you to come and do an in-service. And I said, I don't talk to 3-year-olds about childhood cancer. And she said, oh, won't you please? Said he doesn't have his hair and they won't play with him. They're scared. So I took my Fisher Price toolkit. I took my puppet. I sat down on the floor with the little class, it was a preschool class, and I talked to them about boo-boos, big boo-boos and little boo-boos. Now, a little boo-boo might be when you fall down and you get a little scrape on your knee, but a big boo-boo is when you're feeling really bad and you have to go to the doctor, and sometimes you might even have to go to the hospital, and just one little Band-Aid might not fix it. And then I give them Band-Aids and we talk. And then I tell them about their classmate and that he had a big boo-boo and he had to get some medicine and it made him lose his hair. But you know what? Just like my puppet, the hair always grows back, and I put the hair back on the puppet. And when I left that daycare that day, they were rubbing his head. They were wrestling on the floor, and they were playing and laughing, and I never had to go back again. So it works. And then I've done this for high schoolers. I'll never forget, and I tell this story all the time. I had a second grader, and this young man had leukemia, and he lost his hair. And the protocol for leukemia, the treatment protocol, is about 3 years. And he said, Alma, will you come and tell my class? They're annoying. They ask me the same thing every day. So I took my puppet and I went and did the class. And it was great. And everybody understood. So then he got in 3rd grade. He said, will you come and talk to my class again? I said, yeah, I'll be glad to. So I went up and I did the little in-service, and I showed the puppet and talked about my little patient friend, and, and he was doing much better by that time. So then he got to be in 4th grade. He said, Emma, will you come and talk to my class again? And I said, You have your hair, you finish treatment, you're fine. I don't need to come." And he said, "Won't you please?" So I said, "Okay." So again, I brought that day when I entered the classroom, he got up and he did the presentation for me. I didn't ask him. He had it all planned. So it was therapy too for the child. And when I do these classroom in services, I often ask the child if they want to be involved. Sometimes I find that first year they don't want to, they want to watch and listen. But then usually on that second year, they love showing their portacath and they love showing you how you access the portacath on the puppet and they get to stick the puppet. And they love talking about how you lose your hair, but the hair comes back. And they do the presentation. And it's so therapeutic for them. And I find that once we educate these young people, like in second grade, third grade, they're going to follow these children, their friends, throughout their school career. And I'm telling you, if anybody says anything or wonders what's happened, they're going to stand up for them and they're going to tell the story. Helpful agencies and resources for the older teens and young adults. I always say I love the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, known as STARS. I think every state has one. And that's where you can sign them up and then they're eligible for, they have GED programs, they have independent living programs, they have some tutoring programs, they help them interview for jobs and teach them interviewing skills, lots and lots of programs. Office of Student Support at colleges and universities. People often ask, does the IEP or 504 end in school? Yes. When they graduate from high school, it ends. However, the Office of Student Support at the colleges and universities and sometimes it's called the Office of Disabilities at the colleges and universities, they have accommodations for your child, just like the IEP and the 504. I said just like, but they do vary. So you take their plan, their senior year, and you take it to the college and you say, I need these accommodations because, and it's really under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you talk about the accommodations and they help write the plan. And then they send the plan to the professors. And we always encourage advocacy skills to tell the young person in college to go talk to the professors, explain why they have that plan and they need those accommodations. And usually, the accommodations, it could be suggestions such as permission to tape lectures, um, hard copy of notes and PowerPoints, extended time on tests and quizzes and the work. We definitely need the extended time for those with the slower processing. Then you need to pursue vocational training periods in programs in your area. And I find that most school divisions have vocational training programs even beyond high school. And then for others is the look at the Community Services Board and see what they might have. These are just a few. I did not list all the nonprofit agencies that are out there for the different for children with brain tumors or young adults. I did not list all of that because it varies from state to state. Something I want everybody to remember is that everyone needs a purpose. Everyone needs a purpose. And when young adults come into our clinic, our survivorship clinic, and I'm there every Monday, I always say, are you going to school? This is for the ones who've graduated. Are you going to school? No. Are you working? No. Are you volunteering anywhere? No. Well, then that is not healthy. We all need a purpose and we all need something to do. And as advocates for these young people, we have to help them find that purpose and something to do. We all need advocates. An advocate, some people say advocate's a bad word. You know, if you tell a school division you're bringing an advocate to a school meeting with you, they sometimes get really scared and say, you don't have to do that. Well, we're not. I always say we're partners. We're partners in working in the medical facility and going to about 90 schools a year, setting up educational plans. I know my navigators last year here in Virginia, we went to 230 some school meetings. But a partner, an advocate, is someone who's going to speak up in support of a cause, idea, or person. Um, that should have been often, sorry. Acting as a voice for those who may not be allowed to speak for themselves. And this is where I really want to talk about our education support navigators in the state. It was a long time coming. As I said, I started back in the 90s, and I would go to conferences in different places in other states and speak. And parents would say, oh, boy, I wish I had what you had in Richmond, Virginia. But then I would come back to Richmond, Virginia, and I'd be really sad. And I'd talk to ASK, Childhood Cancer Foundation, and all, and I'd say, I'm really sad. I know we're doing a good job here in Central Virginia, but we have people all over the state, children who are diagnosed who need our help. And then we started working with the Virginia General Assembly. And of course, the money at first we were asking was for research. But then as we started advocating, we said we really need advocates and we need somebody to serve the educational needs of these children so that they can get back to school, so that they can find normalcy, so that they can be productive members of society and get on with their young adult life. And in 2022, when they finally passed that they were going to give us the funding for a navigator at each treatment center in Virginia, I started sleeping better because I knew then that we could train these people at the treatment centers in Virginia and that every child in Virginia could be served. And they are being served. And last year, I think we served 700 and some children and teens and young adults in Virginia with educational services. So self-advocacy, we have to start at a very young age. And I said, it's never too late. I had a little second grader that said, he'd come to our summer camp program. And when we would get 20 some around the table talking about what their diagnosis, and he was 7, he said, I had rhabdomyosarcoma, and he could spell it for me. And I would go, wow. So we have to start early, teaching them about their diagnosis, help them recognize their strengths and their challenges, ask for support and assistance when needed, work with the school divisions, ask for support. I will tell you, and this is something I did not address earlier, but it was a question, public school versus private school. You want to go or send your child where their services and accommodations are going to be needed. In public school, they have to provide them. They're federal guidelines under 504 and IEP. Federal guidelines, they have to provide them. And then we have to teach our young people to use the resources and the accommodations that are provided to them, not to be too proud not to use them. So I thank you for joining us today. I've enjoyed this presentation. I feel like I always have a lot to say and a lot of stories. But the one thing I want to say too is that we all have to work together, and it does take a village. It takes a village, and so we have to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we could hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we're ready for questions, but I do have one more. Oh, yeah. Okay. There we go. I know Alex wants your feedback, and I would love to know how I can make this a stronger presentation. So feel free to let me know how you feel.
Cool. Thank you, Alma. So now we'll welcome questions from all of you. So if you want to go ahead and type any questions you might have into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom window. And we got a couple during the presentation, so I'll start with those. How does the availability of these resources differ if the child attends a private versus public school?
Private schools does not have to provide the accommodations. Public school does. If they have a 504 plan, it's in writing. If they have an IEP, it's in writing and signed. Yes, but private schools do not. Now they usually say we will provide some, accommodations, but they don't have to. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, thank you. And for a school who is denying an IEP, what advice would you give the family for that?
I would say to keep requesting a meeting and take someone with you to the meeting, an advocate. It could be someone from the treatment center. It could be if you have an education consultant working with you there, it could be the social worker. But yes, take someone with you who can educate them and take as many of the resources. Take a copy of the toolkit. Take the clinic dictation. Take all the information. I went through the guidelines with you on how to advocate and just prove to them, yes, they do qualify for these reasons. I find that parents who are empowered and who know the law, and with the 504 plan, it's very easy. Do they have an impairment? What is the impairment? And you have the clinic dictation. So just prove it to them. Mm-hmm.
And what are some resources that are available to expand opportunities for social interactions or clubs both outside and inside county school systems?
That is a wonderful question. I know here through ASK Childhood Cancer Foundation, we offer a lot of opportunities for the students to come together and for them to bond. We do middle school, high school retreats. We do summer camps in the summertime. We even offer young adult retreats. We offer after school tutoring programs. So, and lots of social activities within the school. I think they could, you could talk with the guidance counselor and you could see if somebody could start a class for students with chronic illnesses where they all come together, and it could be their own little special club. You could work with the school nurse to see if she would want to start a little group like that. And then I would really look into, the recreational activities. If you have a child who is unable to go to school, they're on homebound instruction, but if they could participate in a homeschool co-op during that time, that could be smaller and they could join with peers there, that would be great.
And what's the difference between a 504 and an IEP?
A 504 is for students who have a chronic illness, a health impairment that they need accommodations in the school setting due to that. IEP is for a child who needs some direct instruction. They're struggling academically and they need direct instruction from a special education teacher, maybe in writing or reading, math specifically. So direct instruction is the answer to that. Otherwise, the 504 plan will cover the health accommodations that they need.
And so do brain tumor patients who only have surgery and not chemo or radiation still need accommodations in most cases?
That would depend on that would solely depend on the individual, and if they have any of those challenges, the physical, the cognitive, the social, emotional, due to their surgery. If they have any of those challenges that would lighten the load in the school setting, then yes. If they if they're fine and they say, "Mom, Dad, I don't need any accommodations. I'm great," then I'd say no.
Okay. Um, what about advice for a patient whose diagnosis is not new, but learning difficulties are new?
And that happens a lot. I find that as the academic setting gets more difficult as they transition from elementary school, then to middle school to high school, and the work gets more challenging, that's when we sometimes can recognize some of the learning deficits. And that's when we would want to ask for a child study team meeting, go request the evaluations and see if they qualify for a plan in place.
Does a parent have the right to refuse a switch to virtual learning and demand an in-person teacher?
Absolutely. You can send your child to school. You do not have to rely, you do not, never let the school tell you that you have to do homebound instruction.
Okay. How does a child qualify for the IDEA program?
Oh, that's the IDEA through
Mhm.
how do they qualify? They ask for a child study team meeting to I'd like to request a child study team meeting to determine if my child is eligible for services, special education services under IDEA. And then you go to the child study meeting. You ask for a comprehensive evaluation, and a comprehensive evaluation would be the medical, the psychological, the social history, the educational, all those things that the slide I listed under evaluations. Ask for the ones your child needs, and they'll do that. Then I think they have 65 days to do the evaluations. They'll come back to the table, and it's called eligibility. And then you'll determine whether or not they found your child eligible for services.
Okay. Are there small class options available and also slower speed classes for kids going to high school with learning and social difficulties?
It depends on the school divisions or what they have. They all might have special education, which would be they could have self-contained classes, which would be smaller classes where everyone with an IEP, you might have 8 children with IEP in that class. At the same time, they might have collaborative classes, which would be a regular general ed class with 20, 25 students, but it's 2 teachers. It's a special education teacher and a general education teacher in that classroom. So you could always ask when they're scheduling your child that you would like them to have collaborative classes.
Are there any national programs similar to Ask in Virginia? And do you know of any specific ones in Florida?
I don't know of any national, no. Um, but I would tell you, and I would really encourage you, and we would love to help you. I think it would, you know, get a group of parents, get a group of medical people together and start advocating at the state level. Um, it's just amazing to me what can be done when you do that.
Um, okay. With the child study team, can that be requested in any public school in any state?
Yes.
Okay. And I think this is clarification on the question about being switched to virtual versus in person. The services are done virtually while in person at school, if that makes sense. I think they're on a laptop at school. And I think this parent wants to know if they can refuse that and have someone actually in person. Does that make sense?
I think what I would request, I would like them to be in a general education. I would like them to be in a classroom setting, and maybe without the virtual learning.
Okay. And when a child is transferred schools, and if they're denied at one school, can they reapply for an IEP at the new school?
Absolutely. And never take no for an answer. They could be at the same school. If they tell you no, if it's September and they tell you no, then go back in November and say, I'd like to request a child study team meeting because my child is not making adequate progress. Um, they have these challenges and I need them to be addressed. And then, you can always, request, call the State Department of Ed for your state and talk to them if you feel your child is being denied. I think that's the last alternative usually. I don't like to use that. What I really like to do is, request another meeting. And if you've been denied by the group, then go to central office, the central office where they have the supervisors for secondary education, supervisors for special education, assistant superintendent, and ask them to be involved in the meetings.
Cool. I think that's all we got in terms of questions. So yeah, I want to again thank you, Alma, for putting in the time and effort into putting together this super well thought out and super informative webinar for us. I know a lot of families have been asking for one for school, and it means a lot to the PBTF and just the families in general that people will take the time out of their day to do this. And yeah, and I also want to thank our attendees for your participation and thoughtful questions. The PBTF is here to help no matter where you are in your journey. So please reach out to us for support at the contact information on the slide at the end, and we'll be sending you a link to the recording of the webinar as well as the slides from today's presentation, so you have access to all these slides and the survey and the PBTF's information. So yeah, I just want to say again, thank you, Alma.
Well, I enjoyed it. And, please let everyone know that, I am available. And if they ever need to call me and talk to me about a specific case, I'm available. And I think you have my number, Alex.
Okay. Do you want me to include that on our follow-up email?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
That'd be fine.
Sweet. Well, thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and look out for the slides for when I send them.